If you're looking to add effects to your bass signal or virtual effects through a modeler like the HX ones I've got over here, where to place them in the signal chain can be a bit confusing. Randomly placing them on the board will get you a signal, but it might not be the signal that you're looking for. I'm Twisty, stick around and I'm going to take you through the fundamentals of the types of pedals you can use with your bass and where the recommended place for those to be put are. Let's have a look. Whether you're using an amp modeler like the Line 6 or a real amp like my Mark bass over here, there's an essential signal chain that allows you to go from your fingers through the bass, shaped through some effects, EQ'd through your preamp, output through the power stage of your amp, and then out through the speakers for the audience to hear that magic. This essential signal path has one effect in it, and that effect is the tuner. The tuner allows you to make sure that you're always in tune. If the song requires a change in pitch or a different tuning, then the tuner will help you get into that quickly, especially in a loud audience. I remember the good old days when you had tuning forks. Thank God they're not around anymore. Well, I think they're around, but I'm not using one. And the tuner also acts as a mute switch between sets or if you're changing instruments. My Line 6 has one built in. There's lots of complaints through guitarists about the fidelity of the tuner, but at the end of the day, I have no issues with it. It keeps me in tune. Now there are literally thousands of effects pedals that you can put between the tuner and the preamp in that signal path. Many of them are made for guitarists, however there are a number of dedicated ones for bass players. They all form part of one or another family of effects. First group of pedals we're going to look at are the dynamics range of pedals. So these are noise gates and predominantly compressor pedals. So here's my normal sound. Now when I add a compressor to this, it's going to take the louder notes and bring them down, and it's going to make the softer notes and bring them up. And so it's going to compress that signal to give a more consistent signal across that and makes it more cleaner. And also gives me a bit more sustain. So here's the same type of thing with the compressor on. So I'm using the Rochester Comp on the Helix. Other examples are the MXR 87. There's a number of LA2A compressors that are used by a number of bass players, etc. So here's what it sort of sounds like. You'll hear it's a little bit tighter. Especially around that bottom E, it just pulls it in a little bit and makes it less floppy. And that's the standard out of the box configuration. I haven't changed anything, that's just it. So you'd now adjust that to taste, but you can see how it just sort of tightens that up a little bit. Now the next group that's quite popular is the dirt pedals, or the overdrive, distortion, fuzz pedals. Now these are great for giving you a little bit more grit or growl as it comes into your sound. So if your amp is pretty clean, then you can use an overdrive pedal to just push some warm distortion sound over the top and get that cut through. It's especially good when you're in a band with lots of guitars. You know, if you're Iron Maiden, then you've got a bit of cut through between the kick and some of that wall of guitars sound, so the dirt gives you that. So this, again, I haven't set it up. This is just using the Ampeg Scrambler, which is a quite popular overdrive pedal. Outside of my Helix, I use the Billy Sheehan one. That gives you the ability to, it's the EBS pedal. It allows you to put a clean signal and the overdrive signal so you don't lose any bottom end. Because I'm using the Helix, I can do that through multi-pathing, but that's a different video. If you want to see that video, let me know. So if I turn this on, so I turn this on, I'm going to get a bit of a growl. Now that's a lot more aggressive than I'd like to have, but this is for demonstration. So that distortion pedal is going to give you that cut through. If you want that overdrive sound, then that's where you where you get that from as well. The next group we're looking at is the modulation pedals. Now modulation pedals are where it's modulating the phase of the signal. So you've got a signal coming through and it's going to modulate or change that signal as it goes through. The first common one is, let's see what I picked. Okay, so the first one we've picked is the liquid amplifier, the Ampeg liquid amplifier. No, Ampeg liquefier, idiot. So this is a chorus pedal. So this should give you a much fatter sound. So it takes your dry signal and fattens it out a little bit. The way the chorus works is it takes your original signal, it doubles it, and then it detunes that second signal slightly, and then from a phase perspective, and then it doubles it back again. So it's a bit fatter. So you hear that sort of, I like to think of it as fish underwater. It's that wobbly, but it can fix it. And if you add that with some drive, then you'll start to get that drive out as well. The next one we're looking at is the Phase 90 or the phaser pedal. Now, phaser pedals were, in my lifetime, made famous by Eddie Van Halen, and I use his script phaser when I'm not using the Helix. So in my pre-digital life, I was using the Phase 90 pedal. And the phaser basically takes the signal, it cycles the phase of the signal in parts, so it gives us like a swirling sound. So let's see how that goes. So still a bit of a fatter sound than I was getting before without any of the modulation effects, but the chorus makes it a little bit fatter, but I personally quite like the phaser instead of the chorus. And the last one in this series is the flanger. The flanger is a bit like a jet airplane sound. It's the phasing being pushed back and forth, so it's sort of more like this sound. I personally find that the chorus and the flanger, I think, are almost interchangeable, especially on the bass. On the guitar where you got the higher frequencies, it's a little bit harder, not harder to tell, it's easy to tell the difference. On the bass, I find chorus and flanger is a bit of the same, and phaser is a bit of a standout between the three of them. So again, those three modulator type pedals are aimed at making your bass sound fatter or bigger, if you like. The next group of pedals is the delay and reverb group. Now reverb with bass, because of the low frequencies, adding reverb tends to make the sound much more muddy. So I would avoid using the reverb pedal in a live environment. And if you want to use it in the studio, I'd probably leave that to the sound engineer or the mixing engineer to dial that in subtly and as part of a whole mix. I find it a bit muddy. So with the delay, if I set the delay to around 50 to 80 milliseconds, I'll get a little bit of a tight feedback. It's almost instantaneously, but so it's a bit slapbacky. So it just gives again a little bit more depth to the sound, makes it sound a little bit fatter. If I put that on with the phaser, now more commonly the delay is used with a lot longer delay. So if I use it with say 500 milliseconds, so if you're a solo performer, or you're doing a bass solo, if you put that type of delay on, that should give you a bit more effect and give you more body to your sound. So that sounds like with the phaser as well. The last group of them are around, wah pedals, pitch shifters, comb filters. Rather than playing with the phase as the modulations do, these ones change more around the pitch or the tuning of your signal. So depending on which one you go with, it'll give a completely different sound. I don't know much about the synth stuff, so I predominantly use the type of one which is an octaver pedal. So in this case, I've got the Boctaver or the Boss OC2. So this is with the first octave all the way up, the second octave all the way down. Guy Pratt uses this effect on Madonna's Like a Virgin song. So let's see what that sounds like. Add some overdrive into that. And then the last, very, very last, similar to the tuner, which is always on and not really effect, there's also the use of a volume or an expression pedal. So you can adjust the volume. So instead of playing with the volume on your bass, you can use a foot pedal to drive the gain or volume effects block up and down. So there you go. Let's now have a look at which order we should be putting these into. Be good to see in the comments below which effects pedals you're using at the moment and which ones you recommend we all get. Or if you're using a HX or a Quad Cortex or another modeling device, which simulated effects are you using and why? Also, don't forget to subscribe. It'll help the channel a lot. Now, as well as being part of a family of effects types we talked about, effects pedals are also forming into two categories. There's always on and there's on for effect. So in the always on category, these are the ones that are on, as the name implies, all the time and form the basis of your bass sound, which you then augment with occasionally on pedals as you require them for a specific function, which switch in and out depending on the mood you're trying to get at that time. My recommendation for a basic signal chain is the tuner going into a compressor, going into the preamp of your bass amp or a preamp model in your Helix. If you have an active bass, this one's passive, but if you have an active bass with effectively what you're doing is you're putting an EQ in front of the tuner, which then goes into the compressor and then into the preamp for additional tonal change. So in the case of a passive bass, the preamp is providing the EQ toning, and on an active bass, the bass itself is doing the EQing, and then you're doing a final adjustment EQ through the preamp. Now, where you place your compressor is very controversial. I will get hate mail, and thousands of people have an opinion. The two places you can place it is where I've suggested at the beginning or the very first thing after the tuner, or right at the very end. By putting it at the beginning, you're effectively taking the signal that comes out of here and you are then stabilizing that and making it effectively very clean. You're also able to push additional gain through the preamp or into the distortion or into whatever the next pedal you choose to be is. So you can use it like a gain increase. It sets up your signal path to be set to even. So it's even coming from the compressor. Everything you got is now much more normalized or even. Placing it at the end of the signal chain acts more like a sound engineer in a mixing desk. They're then subtly providing compression to glue your bass sound together. So where you've got all of your effects and whatever you put on the signal path, that compressor at the end then glues it all together to make it sound cohesive. So just to reiterate, at the front allows you to drive more subtle overdrive and equalize the signal path from a volume perspective. Loud becomes soft, soft becomes loud, and at the end it's more like glue. It's up to you to work out what type of effect you want that compressor to do, but that's fundamentally how I do it. Now, I always put it at the very front. Let me know how you do it and why I'm wrong. The next thing you would put into your effect is usually the wah pedal. If you're using a wah with a bass, it would normally then go first in the signal after the compressor. Wah pedals are then usually put after the compressor if you're using one, because you've got a clean signal coming through that's able to be manipulated through that wah pedal. The next fundamental pedal that goes in is your dirt pedal. So if you're using overdrive, fuzz, distortion, etc., it would go compressor, standardize and normalize, wah, dirt. And you can use the compressor to drive the gain into that overdrive pedal. After the overdrive, that's when you're normally going to put in any of your filters or modulation type effects. And then after that, you're looking at putting any delays or reverb if you've decided to use reverb. If your amp, like my Mark bass does, and most modern amplifiers do these days, has an effects send and return, then that gives you a lot more flexibility, because you're then able to use the preamp for EQ and toning before you then go into your other effects. So in this case, you'd be looking at your bass to the tuner, to the chorus, your bass into the tuner, into the compressor, the wah if you've got one, your dirt pedal, overdrive, distortion, any other EQ you wanted to put in, and then your preamp going into your amp. In the effects loop, you then go from the send on your effects loop into any modulation pedals, chorus, flanger, etc., any synth filter type pedals, your wah, any delay or reverb type pedals. You then go back into the return, and then that goes into the power stage of your amp and then out through the cabinet. So you're effectively taking your modulation, filter and EQ delay things and moving them behind the preamp and before you then amplify out to the rest of the world. This gives you a much better control over that. So again, there are 1,000 ways to do this. The way I choose to do it, and the most simplistic way, especially if you're a starting out bass player, is the bass. If it's active or passive, doesn't matter. Again, if it's active, it's going to have an EQ before you go in the signal chain. Otherwise, if it's passive like this, it's bass into a tuner. The tuner then goes into a compressor, and from a compressor, then it comes down to which effects you want to use at a point in time to switch in and out for an effect. That's why they're called effects. So compressor, tuner, always on, and the rest would be as required in that way. Now again, this is the way I recommend you do it. Please let me know if there's a better way of doing it, or if you've identified a different order that gets a different sound that we'd all like to hear about. If you're starting to get a good basic tone out of your amp configuration within your amp modeler, sign up to the newsletter. The link is below in the description to get a free 5-phase guide on how to get the ultimate bass tone out of your equipment.